You've been working on the broader level, the VC and the private equity industry. Obviously, US was ahead of us 20 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago, and then EIF came upon and tried to do good stuff. Can you tell us the work that EIF has been doing, and especially in the green space? What are your efforts? How do you measure them, and how do you try to have an impact in your job?
For sure. Thank you first for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here with such a great panel. So the EIF was created about 30 years ago. It's an EU body that was created to help SMEs get access to financing. And SMEs really represent the backbone of the EU economy. A surprising fact is that over 99% of all businesses in the EU are SMEs. So we were created with that objective in mind. And almost 20 years ago, we started to invest into impact. And so we are the largest fund-of-fund investor in Europe. So we invest over 4 billion per annum into funds, both on the VC side and the private equity side. And we started investing in the mid-2000s, just before Ecovedis was founded, into what was known then as clean tech. And we also then developed a strategy that also invested into social impact funds. And so we have a track record of over 110 impact funds today, over 2.5 billion euros deployed in this strategy.
And you help not just the established funds, but the new funds?
Absolutely,
and when choosing funds you want to back, what are you assessing, like the top 3 criteria you're assessing?
So the first criteria is really additionality. So our aim is really not to crowd out private investors. That's really not what we stand for, and that would not be a good use of EU taxpayers' money. The second aim is to support managers that display intentionality. And so particularly in the green tech impact space, we try to suss out those who show not only expertise but also conviction, so that there will not be any mission drift throughout the 10 to 15-year partnership that you have when, as an LP, you invest into a fund. And the third point, which is linked to the second, is that the fund managers that we back in the impact space need to be open to tying a portion of their variable remuneration, also known as carry, to impact.
And in the green space, how many funds? 60 funds is the number, correct?
So we have over 60 funds that we have backed in the past, and in green tech, that represents about 1.8 billion euros of investment.
Any wish for the future?
Any wish for the future? A number of wishes for the future, actually.
Go for it.
Because I have time, I will go for it. I think the first thing, which I imagine everyone in this room is convinced of, is that we need more capital towards these areas, and we critically more capital. So the more we can convince people that impact and profitability go hand in hand, and I really think that the spectrum whereby you plotted profit on the one hand and impact on the other, I really think that with climate change, that linear relationship is completely obsolete. Mm-hmm. So we need more capital, and we need to convince people to move there. We also need people to understand that it's not the problem is very local. Mm-hmm. An incredible fact is, of the 45 most hydric stressed nations, 5 are in the EU, including Belgium. So it's a problem that is really close to home, and it really means that impact needs to be integrated as part of any asset management strategy, really. And then the third wish is that anyone who is moved by this problem would find their role to play. So for the EIF as a European institution, our role, as you mentioned, is to back first-time and emerging fund managers. Roles for family offices, increasingly complementary and more prominent in this space, is to help nascent fund managers launch on their journey and provide warehousing capital, for example, to help them demonstrate or start building a track record as they're fundraising. I'm going to be as transparent as I can with you this evening.
It's not being taped. Forget it's being taped.
So we've been investing since 2006 into climate tech. And what we've seen is broadly 3 waves of investment and 3 waves of performance. Initially, the performance was poor, and poorer, certainly, than generalist tech. Two reasons for that, according to our post-mortem analysis, but that's also seen by others. The first is a lack of expertise. So the initial fund managers that we backed had broad strategies across several sectors, but the companies that they were backing were in very complex sectors, and they didn't have the knowledge necessary to be able to grow those companies, and they couldn't capitalize on what they were doing for another company in their portfolio and transfer those skills and those learnings to the next company because the sectors were so broad. So first reason, lack of expertise. Second reason, they were backing companies that couldn't thrive within the constraints of VC. And VC implies two constraints. One, time, because a VC fund exists for 10 years plus extensions, up to, several extensions. And
up to 30.
Let's not debate.
And then the second constraint is in terms of capital. So a VC fund is only as large as a VC fund. And so the companies that were being backed often implied a hardware element, often implied novel materials, and they were not standard, not the types of companies or business models that you were alluding to earlier. And so that's why the first wave failed. Second wave started in the early 2010s. Then there were learnings and improvements. We see some fund managers who certainly perform. A lot of the business models are those that you mentioned, with a software element and things that had been proven in tech. And the third wave is the one that we're in now, and it started in the early 2020s. Therefore, very limited performance data and certainly nothing or limited realizations. But what we're seeing, and it represents 2/3 of what we've invested into, is that there are very promising performance indicators. And we really hope that the performance is going to be on par, at least, if not exceed. And I think your experience also adds to that, the performance of generalist tech.